Dear Balkan Pod listeners, I'm Dilek KÜTÜK from Turkey. Today, my guest is Gorčin Dizdar, who is working in tourism sector. But most importantly, he has managed the Mak Dizdar Foundation in Bosnia Herzegovina because he is the grandson of Mak Dizdar. This foundation has 4 strategic goals: promoting Mak Dizdar poet work, supporting the development of cultural tourism in Stolac and Herzegovina, spreading the idea of reconciliation between the peoples of Bosnia Herzegovina, and encouraging the dialogue between cultures and civilization in general. Today, we talk with him about Mak Dizdar and his legacy. I mean, what Mak Dizdar Foundation is doing, and also Mak Dizdar and his grandson's works on Stećak, which is the name for monumental medieval tombstones. So, I want to start this very serious subject without wasting time. Dear Gorčin, welcome to Balkan Pod.
Thank you for the invitation.
Actually, I'm very excited and very confused about what to ask because, it has been a long time since I read something about Mak Dizdar, so I'm sure it will be good talk.
I'm here for all your questions.
Great. I know he is your grandfather, and when he died, you were not even born. So my first direct question is that who is Mak Dizdar for you?
That's a really good question. Well, of course, besides being my grandfather, he's simply, a very significant person with who's, kind of the aura of him, not just as a person, even I would say not primarily as a grandfather, but more so as a poet and as a figure who significantly influenced the way we in Bosnia and Herzegovina feel our identity and our relationship towards this place.
What are the words or poems that impressed you the most?
I mean, there is a lot of his poems that I really like, but perhaps it's even there is one quote by him, which is not even a poem, but it's something that he said in an interview, and that I think it really encompasses his approach to writing and writing literature in general. He said, "During my life, I did not write very much, and I think I wrote quite well, but I wish I could have written even better and even less." So it really encompasses this particular way where, it's not about the quantity of writing, but it's rather about the essence. So this is really what he tried to achieve through his work, to express kind of the essence of, on the one hand, the situation of our country, our identity, but on the other hand, and I would say more significantly, answers to some universal questions of the modern human being.
I know, and I search you, and you're very passionate about, advancing the tourism sector in Bosnia Herzegovina, and you manage this Mak Dizdar Foundation, right? And which is also a part of your family heritage, implementing numerous projects in the fields of cultural and educational tourism. And I think it's a very big obligation to be at the helm of Mak Dizdar Foundation. So what is the purpose of this foundation, and do you think it contributes to the tourism of Bosnia?
I mean, the tourism, kind of my personal interest as well as the foundation's involvement in tourism was a kind of later development. So I will start with what it was first. So the foundation was founded by my father, and its primary purpose was to kind of promote and even to protect the heritage of Mak Dizdar. And I will just try to briefly explain why protect. And this is because even though he's considered, great and even the greatest poet, many people would say, of Bosnia and Herzegovina, really his whole work and his idea stood for a Bosnian Herzegovina as a united country, regardless of the religion or ethnic identity that's so predominant in modern society. And in accordance with this predominant view, there were many attempts to I would say, misinterpret his work and abuse for particular political purposes while ignoring its universal humanist approach. So this was the primary idea, to make sure that the right approach to his work remains living or remains well known, and to promote in general his work in Bosnia to the new generations as well as abroad, because there are still many languages, Turkish included, for example, where we don't have translations of his most significant books. And then the interest in tourism came in a way secondarily, because one of the major things the foundation is doing is we run a museum in Mak Dizdar's birth town Stolac. Because, of the political and economic situation in general, it's quite difficult to get any kind of funding and support for purely cultural projects. And very early on, we saw that tourism can be one method by which to overcome this, by which to come to, secure some necessary funding and to promote the culture. And I mean in this even domestic tourism, but especially, this communication with the world, which is sometimes difficult. So that's how, I personally started working more in the field of cultural tourism. And the foundation also started implementing projects in this field because, it's a nice way of connecting culture with some, economic benefits, which is in the end what is really needed in this country at the moment.
And you mentioned that he had an idea of united Bosnia, and also he has a humanistic way of thinking. Actually, you're trying to show a different side of him, I think. You try to take Mak Dizdar out of the literal context only, and you are putting him different position. This is my opinion, by the way. Maybe you don't agree. But could you tell us something about how he present the existence of a united culture of Bosnia, even during maybe medieval age? Could you give us some example about what you did about this?
Again, a really good question that we could talk about for a long time. And there are books written about this theme on Mak Dizdar especially. But to briefly explain, perhaps to those who are not familiar with the situation, the dominant division within Bosnian Herzegovinian society is into the religious one that's turned kind of ethnic, which is, the Muslim Bosniaks, the Catholic Croats, and the Orthodox Serbs. And this division really stems from the Ottoman period, the 16th century onwards. And this is when these three different communities became clearly distinguished from each other. And basically, the roots of the modern relations can be found then. However, what was especially ignored before Mak Dizdar's time and today is that, Bosnia had its history and its identity prior to this period, and even, a separate culture embodied in famous Stećak tombstones, the UNESCO World Heritage medieval sculptures and Mak Dizdar was inspired by this culture, and he kind of tried to revive it and make it at the same time, significant in the modern period. So he's not simply, sometimes he's maybe a bit misunderstood superficially as a kind of romantic poet looking back for a golden, past, but that's not what he did. He actually, at the same time discovered the past and showed us that, some of the same problems that were faced, hundreds of years ago, we're still facing them today. And in the end, it's about, again, I will use this expression, the more universal questions that are faced by, I would say, most human beings in the world, faced by, the challenges of modernity and often its conflicts and often uneasy relationship with tradition. And Mak Dizdar has already, especially in the pre-war period, been, more than a literary figure. He's really, in a way, he created the way we think about ourselves. And this is something that I think is worth preserving in the modern age. Being Bosnia, regardless of religion, is really having less and less value, and people are not really, unfortunately, it doesn't play any role in politics anymore. And I think it's at least important to preserve it in this field of arts and culture as an idea that, could be preserved for the future. And perhaps your question, what we did, I think also what he did in his work is, take the old and traditional and make it modern again. And that's what we do in various ways with the Mak Dizdar Foundation, showing that, tradition doesn't have to be this, closed-minded, static, conservative thing, but, that tradition is something to be rediscovered by each generation, that we can, find the good sides and not necessarily, just passively accept, we have to protect our tradition, but actually develop a creative relationship with it.
I saw some of your project. Also, I think you are right now doing an exhibition. What are your future projects that you can tell us?
There's always many ideas. I will tell you a little bit about the project we're working on now. And so it's an exhibition of 3D prints and a VR experience of the Stećak, so this medieval cultural heritage of Bosnia, which is spread in often distant locations all around the country. And we have created 3D scans and, based on that, created a VR experience. So it's, in along the lines that I was talking about, trying to make traditional culture interesting and relevant in the contemporary period. And for the future, there is the regular things we're doing, often activities in the town of Stolac, where Mak Dizdar's birthplace. We also run his museum, which is still a very divided town, a strictly kind of sad situation where, the Bosniak and Croat kids even go to separate schools. It's quite, almost an apartheid situation. So, I can't tell you any concrete plans now, but I'm sure that there will be different ways in which we will continue to, fight against this, what we consider abnormal system in our country, and to represent our culture to our own people as well as to the world, and to, use tourism and cultural tourism maybe as a way to achieve those same goals.
I would like to bring the topic to that medieval age tombstones, because it's really attract my attention. You conduct research about medieval tombstones and you have really impressive academic career, by the way. And the topic you choose is very interesting. What is your purpose or argument to search this very old stone?
Well, it was partially also, again, inspired by my grandfather's work, which also started from this medieval culture, but to keep it very brief. So the so-called Stećak or standing stone is a type of large monolithic stone from the medieval period found in Bosnia, and we still found mainly in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to a very small extent also in surrounding regions in Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro. There is still around 70,000 of these stones weighing, 10, 20 tons each. So it's a really impressive culture and a unique culture for this period. And what is particularly interesting is its iconography, the carvings on these stones. When you see them for the first time, you would think perhaps it's something prehistoric or, late antiquity. It doesn't seem to belong to the medieval period. It's full of ancient symbols that are not normally found in Europe in this period. And it's simply a very, very, fascinating aspect of cultural heritage, not just for our country, but for Europe and the world as a whole. And, this is simply something that I think was reason enough to get into this topic a bit more. And then when you start reading about it, and very complex and disputed religious history of medieval Bosnia, where there was a so-called Bosnian church, which was neither Catholic nor Orthodox, but a kind of early form of Christianity that was considered heretical by both the Catholics and Orthodox. And then in order to understand that, you have to go back to, the early Christians and Gnostics and all these movements. So in a way, these stones, to explain them, this slight anomaly in this small country, you have to kind of read, and there is no end to it.
I remember that I think you published a book about Stone Sleeper. It was about this. The book was written by Mak Dizdar. right?
Yeah, that is Mak Dizdar's most famous book of poetry, is called The Stone Sleeper, and it's inspired by the inscriptions on these tombstones. So he wrote poetry, and I did my PhD researching these stones about their art and iconography and symbolism and history. And unfortunately, I haven't published my full PhD yet, but I have published a small book called simply Stećak, which is also available in English. And it's a kind of short introduction to this topic.
And you talk about these tombstones was really unique in Bosnia Herzegovina. And did you find similarities among the other tombstones around the world, or those in Bosnia are really unique?
Well, the general idea is that they are quite unique, but during my kind of studies, I also had the opportunity to travel to the Caucasus and especially Armenia. And I found that in Armenia and the territories which were also in the past inhabited by Armenians, we do in fact find kind of similar type of tombstones, which is quite, when you hear it first, it sounds very far-fetched, like how could Bosnia, the Balkans and the Caucasus be connected? But in fact, if you look deeper, there are cultural connections, and I would like to research this topic more. For example, what I found only in literature, I haven't had the opportunity to travel there, but in the Russian Republic of Dagestan, in fact, there is also many similarities with the traditional arts there. And even as far as the Uyghur people in modern day Western China, again, this is something based on literature and online reviews, but today they use tombstones that kind of have some similarities. So this is more a feeling rather than academic opinion, but I think that it's about this kind of Central Asian influence on this part of the world and civilization in general, which is often, ignored even in modern day art history. It's a very Eurocentric discipline, I would say, and there a lot of work remains to be done to study other cultures such as this one.
I saw on the tombstone there are many shapes. Is there a tombstone whose story you read and impressed you so much? I don't know, maybe there is a story behind this all, shapes.
It's very interesting because, even though they are estimated to be 500-600 years old, there is, very little actual knowledge what these stones represent. But there are still, stories among the people. And even so, my grandfather, Mak Dizdar, in his book Stone Sleeper, he mentions that as a child, he was going with the local women from his, when there was no rain for a long time, and they would go to pray for the rain around these stones and even scrape some of the dust of the stones. It was considered to have, let's say, magical powers. So it's interesting that these stones, even though they are not part of the contemporary religions, they have been included in Orthodox and Catholic and Muslim, rituals even up to our day. Unfortunately, not our days. So as I said, Mak Dizdar, yes, maybe early 20th century, and now we're still trying to find the last traces, and I think it's a unique opportunity. If we don't do some more research now, it will be lost forever.
Dear Gorčin, really thank you for being here. You're doing very valuable works and keeping your grandfather's legacy alive. So I wish you success in your life.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for asking good questions.
Dear listeners, see you next week, same day and same time.